literally like 18. And now that we're recording, I will not talk about those details any longer.
Congratulations. That is super exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Ready to rock and roll, Stephanie.
Yes, done with the small talk. Okay,
We got it. Got
I
it.
am ready to go. Welcome everybody. Good morning. And March 6th. Who thought that was going to happen? I thought it was still like, I don't know, January or something. So welcome. Thank you all. We have a good meeting set up today. And just to get started, I'm going to do roll call, although it looks like we are missing quite a few, unless I'm wrong. So I'll just start going down the list. Kelly Abbott, I don't see. Norma, Michelle, I see Miss Ashley, Anna Cole. There you are. Hello, Anna.
Hi.
Jenna, I see you. Brian Cotter, I said hello. Excellent. Dennis is with us today. Janelle. Not seeing Janelle. Dave Hayes. Chelsea.
I'm here.
Hi, Chelsea.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Hello, Kevin Lash.
Good morning.
Dave Lee.
I am here. Good morning.
Hello. Good to see you. Renee.
Hi, I'm here. I'm going to be off camera because I'm homesick.
Oh, thank you for joining us anyway. I hope you feel better. Beth.
Morning.
Good morning. Brandon. I saw Miss Becky.
Good morning.
Elizabeth.
Here.
Hi. Lynette. Timothy. Smelser. Not here. I'm here. And Jana. Okay. Did you get those numbers, Trace? I don't think I left anybody off.
Present. No, I don't think you left anyone off.
Okay, cool.
Brandon Miller's just joining, so we'll keep tabs, but
Great.
I was just looking to make sure that we had a majority.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out.
Who's the 303-229 number?
That is me, Trace. Lori Burney.
Okay.
Oh,
Hey, Lord.
hi, Lori.
We weren't. Okay, perfect.
Morning.
All right. We're good right now.
Are we good? Okay.
Yeah. We're good to
Thank
proceed
you.
either way. We just won't be able to vote at this point. So on anything
Well,
else.
and I was wondering just about approval of minutes. I think that's what my main concern is. Do we have a majority to walk through those?
We have 14 members. So yes.
So we're good. Okay. Fantastic. All right. Thank you for your patience, all. We're going to go ahead and go through. We have quite a few documents to get approved this morning. I'll always ask for a first or for a motion, a second, and please announce your name as you make those motions. We're going to start with approval of the group meeting minutes from February 14th. Any additions or corrections to that document? Seeing none, if I could have my two motions.
Ashley Chase, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
This is Dennis Disparis. I'll make a second.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Is there anybody opposed to passing the February 14th full group meeting minutes? Okay, those meeting minutes will pass. Moving on to the full group. I'm sorry, I just did that. Moving on to the intervention subcommittee meeting minutes. Any changes that need to be made to those? All right, if we could have our motions.
Elizabeth, I'll motion to pass.
Thank you. Is there another member of that subcommittee who can second?
Yes, I
I'll second.
Was that Brian Cotter? Great, thank you. All right, any opposition to approval of the intervention subcommittee meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none, those will pass. Moving on to the prevention subcommittee meeting minutes. For that group, any changes that need to occur to that document? Seeing none, if I could have the two motions, please.
Jenna, I can motion to pass.
I will second.
Okay, I saw Jenna was a first, and I'm sorry, who was our second? Dave Lee.
David Lee.
Thank you, Dave. Any opposition from passage of the prevention subcommittee meeting minutes? Great. All right, friends, we're going to do the exact same thing for our meeting recaps. Going back to our intervention subcommittee meeting recap from February 14th of 2024. Again, any changes that need to occur to that document? I see none. If I could have a motion, my two motions for that document.
I recommend we propose we approve the subcommittee meeting minutes.
Thank you. Second?
I second it. It's Brandon.
Thank you, Brandon. And just, is there any opposition from members regarding the approval of the meeting recap, February 14th, for the intervention subcommittee? All right, thank you, friends. Those will be approved. And finally, the prevention subcommittee meeting recap. Any changes that need to occur to that document? You're an easy group. Seeing none, if we could have the two motions.
I'll make a motion. It's Ashley.
Thank you.
I'll second. This is Becky.
Thank you, Becky. Is there any opposition to approval then of that prevention subcommittee meeting recap? I see none. That will pass. All right. Thank you, friends. I will find a more expeditious way to do that one day. I'm just never sure how. I am done with my duties, Trace.
Perfect. Thanks, Stephanie. And good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. Appreciate y'all being here. I want to name one thing, which is I'm trying to explore with the team around the opportunity to hopefully gather in person sooner rather than later for one of our meetings. So I was like, it's been too long, and it would be nice to do something in person. So I just want to name that, because sometimes in starting these meetings, it's like I wish I could share space with you all. So be looking forward to that, because we'll try to see which dates might work best for folks, and I think Keystone will be hosting. So it should be a good time. But with that, gonna jump into the slides, Jordan, if you will. We're making a lot of progress with this group. I'm really honestly really encouraged of all the groups that I'm part of. This one is marching forward at a very steady pace, which is exciting. So just want to remind you of where we're headed on the roadmap, and then also we'll talk through the directives of what we have remaining. If you can believe it, we're going to wrap up by September 14th or September 4th with this work. So today we're going to do the full group review of the subcommittee work. And again, following the similar format, first half of the meeting will be with Doris, second half will be with me. You'll get to hear from folks from the group around what they discussed. You all the recommendations that were sent out to you, but we'll also be reviewing those and just talking through those. And then you'll do a survey at the end that'll help us understand if you're ready to move forward on those recommendations or not. And then going back into April 10th, we'll go back into our subcommittees, temporary placement and restraints. Again, back for the review in May, subcommittees in June, back for the review in July. And we do need to choose a new July date. I'm assuming folks don't want to show up on July 3rd, which is what we would have been slated to do. So we'll send that out as well to you all to make sure that that you all have that date as soon as we can. And then August and September, we'll be working to finalize those recommendations and reports. With that, moving on to the next slide, just want to remind you all with the directives, it's a lot of check boxes, which we love to see. So we've got 9 directives, total 6 complete, and 3 ongoing. So really we're in this analysis piece on the best practices, both state and national. So we continue to hear from folks that Brian is doing such a good job bringing folks in. And we have identify resources needed to improve communication and coordination among entities, and analyzing correlation between running from care and being a victim of crime. So those are really the three that remain. And you saw those topics of how we. So with that, just want to remind folks, again, a ton of work has been accomplished thus far. Still some really critical work to go, but we're getting there, and I think we're on a really great pace at this point. So any questions, any clarifications, any concerns about how we're getting from here to there? Okay, great. All right, you can take that down. Perfect. Well, we've got a good group today, and I know that I don't see Norma on the call yet, but we're gonna start with Doris's group today from last time. So Doris, I know we were just messaging around how we might move forward without Norma being the presenter. So I'm gonna hand it over to you. And also, just so you all know, today we'll start with Doris's group, hear from them, talk through, have a conversation. Then we're going to take a short break, and we'll come over to my group. Jenna's presenting, and we'll kind of talk through those recommendations, and then we'll wrap for the day. So Doris, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. So just to recalibrate, you all received the not one pager, but the couple page document that walk through 4 recommendations or proposed recommendations, draft recommendations for our conversation today. We're going to be focused on recommendations 3 and then 4. In Norma's absence, she conveniently dipped on us because she was volunteered to do the report out. We're going to have Brian sort of provide a high level reminder of what's included in the draft recommendations. And then we'll have some conversation opportunity for you to ask questions for clarifying just what is included in the draft recommendations, and really want to have conversation around the elements that you think are really strong. And I think importantly for Jordan and Brian, any questions or concerns that you have in what's included so that we can make note of those items. The goal here today at the very end is to gain your overall sentiment around the draft recommendations, and we'll have a survey where you will include that information. So a little bit about where we are right now, and then where we're heading as we wrap up. I don't remember who's going to share screen. We're going to pull the document up so that for those of you who like to see it in front of you and may not have it handy or want to toggle back between screens, we're going to pull it up and sort of do, again, a high level quick run through of what's included in the draft recommendations, and then pause for questions and conversation. Can you maybe make that, whoever's sharing screen, is it possible to make it bigger? Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, is that big enough?
I mean, maybe.
Okay,
I can see it. I'm just trying to be inclusive, making sure that, other folks can all see it very easily. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doris. So I'd be happy to go over some of the process and then just give a summary of what the recommendation says. So just for the process standpoint, I know that you all likely know this, but last time we went into the subcommittee groups and we discussed these topics. And then we asked for a volunteer to work with me on drafting the recommendation. So even though Norma's not here today, she was involved in approving this draft. So just to give it a bit more bona fides on why you're looking at this particular version. It's just already, there's been input from the task force that's already been incorporated into the recommendations that we're looking at today. But so yeah.
Hey, Brian.
Yep.
Norma has joined.
Oh, great.
Norma has entered the room. Hey, Norma.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry that I'm late, but I'm here.
No worries. We were talking smack about you. By we, I mean me, but we're all friends at this point. Welcome.
I'd like to know what you said at least.
No, I was like, Norma was, she volunteered to speak, and I was like, she's conveniently not here. Interesting.
I'm here.
Thank you. So we were just providing a little bit of an overview, Norma, of kind of how we got to this point. You can see on the screen that we have the document pulled up with the draft recommendations language. And so we are starting to, or we were getting ready to walk through recommendation 3, the standardized statewide policies. And Brian was at the ready to go ahead and present the kind of a high level of what's included in the draft recommendations as we awaited your joining. So do you want to take us from here and just sort of map out what's included in the recommendations, and then Brian and I can support filling in any gaps?
Sure. So yeah, so recommendation 3A talks about, as it says, creating a multi-tiered category of risk of running from care. So meaning, we would sort of come up with tiers of risk from low risk to, extreme risk. And that would be what's considered when a child runs. We would sort of assess and put them in one of those tiers, if that makes sense. And that would be, evaluated ongoing throughout their stay, so that, kids, obviously their level of risk to run is, kind of ebbs and flows. So at one point they could look like they're super high risk, and at another point they could look like they are very low risk. One of the things that we talked about was, one of my concerns, at least, was that the people that would be sort of assessing the risk level for kids would probably be milieu staff, and just, needing, those are sort of the youngest, most inexperienced folks. And so trying to figure out, sort of where would that sort of lay? Would it be with those milieu people, or would there be calling somebody else in, like a master's level person or something, to help in evaluating the risk of a child? Then 3B is create varying response. Wait, let me stop for a minute. Is there anything that Doris or Brian, you guys want to add?
The only thing I would add is that rather than the task force making up the exactly specific categories, we would have the third-party entity that we would already be tapping into. And this is a little bit like multi-layered, but recommendation 1, the recommendation we've already approved, would have either a third-party nonprofit or a university. We would contract with them, or ask the legislature to contract with them to create risk assessment tools. And then part of that would be creating these categories within that risk assessment. So the task force wouldn't be tasked with creating that. But
sorry, you're right, Brian. Thanks.
No, that's fine. And then, yeah, just the question of like what characteristics would populate those categories. This recommendation just provides that appendix that has several of those categories that we discussed in the task force group, like in need of medication, pregnant, suicidal, those different components to take into consideration. But otherwise, yeah, great, Norma. Just wanted to let folks know that we won't be going into actually writing out this protocol. We'd be hiring experts to do that on our behalf.
Yeah, and so along those same lines, this entity that we would contract with or whatever would then create varying response protocols for each of the categories. So, if a child were to be super high risk, that would trigger a certain response. If they were lower risk, that would trigger a different response. And so that's what this recommendation 3B talks about.
Awesome. Thank you, Norma. And just calling out too that we're using, for the purpose of the conversation and in the draft recommendations, this language around like higher or lower risk, or high or low risk. There is you'll note in the document at the bottom, that there is recognition that this is deficit-based language. And so we're using that potentially as a placeholder for, you know, these different levels, because it makes sense to us when we're having conversation, but there may be different language that once a contractor is brought on, and there is actually development of these different levels of risk, and corresponding responses that language may, and, you know, we hope, I think likely will shift to be more asset-based. Thank you so much, Norma. David, I see that you are off mute. Was that intentional or unintentional?
No, unintentional.
Okay. I thought you were gonna hurry, like be the first one to jump in with, you know, oh, this is great. But that's okay. Don't feel put on the spot, David.
Oh, thank you.
All right, thank you, Norma. All right, I want to pause there and see if first, if anyone has any clarifying questions about what's included in this particular recommendation with its subcomponents.
Of course, I've got something.
All right, thank you, Sergeant Cotter.
So I feel like in lieu or in way of prevention, sometimes that's just pre-planning. And so I wasn't part of the subcommittee, so I don't want to jump in inappropriately, but I feel like we could do some work to pre-plan. If the child runs, where will we look? Knowing that they're at high risk already, especially, and maybe it's driven by the categories that the assessment tool helps us to determine, but maybe kids at a higher risk of running, maybe we do some extra screening or questioning to sort of get ahead of that. What are their likes? Where are their family at? Where have they run in the past? How independent are they? Would we expect that they would go kind of homeless, or would we expect that they would be looking for support? So that's something that I thought kind of didn't get covered very well in this list.
Yeah, I think that is an important point that you know, Brian mentioned that recommendation 1 and recommendation 3 connect to each other in this assessment of risk level for the child or youth. And, you know, I think certainly in recommendation 1, that would be part of the assessment of the child or youth in care, right? So like assessing not only what is their level of risk for running, but also doing some risk mitigation if the child is determined to be at a certain level of risk for running. What is the sort of like the preemptive plan to both prevent the run, but then also to, I think, intervene most appropriately should the child run away from care. Stephanie?
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts, Brian, and I'm just looking at recommendation 1. And it feels like there's probably room to be more specific about what Brian is talking about here. As I look at 1, it's pretty high level, which is fine, right? It's, you know, develop a risk assessment tool, create a 1-year pilot program. But maybe if the task force, and I'm thinking more about the report, less about the recommendation, where maybe information like Brian has talked about can be inserted, right? So, you know, we could always say something to the effect of, you know, as we work with a third-party consultant, that person should consider the following. And maybe that's some report language we want to talk about adding, just to get more specific about what this group wants to see.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. And then I saw Brian's note in the chat about the post-recovery assessment that's included in recommendation 1. And I think to Stephanie, to your point, in response to Brian's comments, that there, you know, may be an opportunity to be more specific in terms of once information is collected, it's not just about, assessing and then reassessing. It's about ultimately using that information to prevent the youth from running or to intervene quickly and appropriately. Norma?
Yeah, so I appreciate everybody's comments, and I think that there's definitely something there. I don't know that we knew how into the weeds we should get with some of these things. And so it's good to know that we could add some information here. I think that most residential programs hopefully are going to ask those questions as part of their admission. So meaning that, when a kid first comes in, we should be assessing what their level of risk is, what their past behaviors have been, where do they go when they run, like all of those kinds of things, so that you have that information already ready to go. And certainly it changes, but if we're going to wait till the child is high risk to run and then start asking questions, right, we're not going to get the information that we need at that time. So it's good to know that we could be a little more specific in some of these.
Yeah, thank you, Norma. And I think it'll be a matter of figuring out what goes into like the recommendations, because we don't want to be too prescriptive in the recommendations when we still have to do a lot of work to figure out how this big thing gets implemented. So I like the idea that Stephanie put forth about, maybe including some of that nuance in the report, so that there's an opportunity to explore those topics and issues more deeply. Brian?
Yeah, I agree that there could be some nuance between the report and the recommendations. I think what I'm envisioning is this recommendation that we have now seems to do a good job bringing in a lot of information, but just like trails, it's all over the place. And so what I'm envisioning is some sort of pre-plan. Like the fire department doesn't say, hey, the planning department has maps of the building. The fire department gets their own copy, makes some notes about how they're going to respond to a fire that happens at that building. And like our SWAT team does the same thing around schools. We pre-plan, how are we going to go gain entry? And so what I'm envisioning is like a summary of, if this kid runs, here's what the intervention teams should do. And it can be supported by all of the history that we've collected in these assessments and these long relationships that caseworkers and families have had with this child, but have it in one place and have it ready to go so that we're not having to put a research team out to figure it out while the child's missing.
Thank you. I have one clarifying question, Brian. Are you imagining that kind of run planning happen for every youth?
I think there's room to discuss that, because I think there's a large volume if I said yes to the answer, right? But
yeah,
we've got this idea of screening questions. So maybe we do it at the higher level or levels, or only the highest level. The ones that we're really worried about, maybe we don't factor it in as who do we think will run, but who do we think will be in danger if they run, those sorts of decision points, so that when we have this moment that everyone's going to say, oh my God, this is a crisis, we're ready to respond to it because we already decided if the kid runs, it's a crisis. Now, there's going to be other kids, like we've talked about in the meeting, that older teen who, is just going to go back to his parents' house because he doesn't want to be a placement. Maybe they don't need a run plan. We're not as worried about them. We've talked about different levels of intervention. Maybe we're not even going to send out the whole group to go searching for them because they are a lower risk. They're probably going to be safe and independent. But those younger kids, those kids that are, at risk for trafficking, for example, what are we going to do then? And have that organized in advance.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Elizabeth and then Beth.
Right. So I agree with Brian. Like this risk assessment should be done on intake, and we should already know if that child's high risk by the time they run, because we don't want the milieu staff deciding when they have to make a report what risk the child is. Like we want this already in their plan upon intake and then evaluated at, the therapeutic level along the way.
Thank you. Beth?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Brian had said, I do think absolutely that it's crucial for the intake, doing the assessment, but also on the return, because those things can fluctuate and change when a youth is missing. But also, as we talked about with the tier process, there should be on every level, whether it's low or high risk, there should be that initial data collection, right? Obtaining a photo, gathering information that maybe NCMEC needs. So that way we have it, so that way in a week, when all of a sudden maybe this initially started as low risk, but then a week later we're getting more information that this is now high risk, we're not having to backtrack to gather that information.
Thank you, Beth. And I think that echoes some of what Brian was sharing. Like there should be, some pre-planning that happens, that the assessment is not just for, it's not just about, collecting information to assess for risk level, but also gathering some information so that if the youth does run away, then you already have some parts of the plan in place to intervene appropriately. Norma?
So I just kind of wanted to add again that a lot of residential programs already have these things in place. Like we are mandated to take a picture of the child when they come in, like all of those, like a lot of those kinds of things are in place. I think the part that, might be missing is just the planning ahead kind of stuff that should be happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Norma. And Brian, I see your hand is still up. I think it's still up, not raised again. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. What other questions or feedback input do all of you have? And then I just want to note that Brian also put in the chat the connection to recommendation 2. Stephanie?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on your comment, Norma, to make sure that our report and or recommendations are specific, right? That they aren't in any way duplicating existing practice. Can you just say more about, and I guess I would say what existing practice is and whether or not these practices vary from facility to facility, because maybe indeed what this group needs to do is make obviously a recommendation for consistency among facilities, right? But I also want to make sure we're not saying, take a picture of every child, right? And I don't think we would put that as a rec, and you're like, hey, we already do that. And the rest of Colorado would agree. So I just want to be clear if you can help us with that.
Sure. I mean, I think that there are some things that are consistent that are just dictated by regs. And so, like taking a picture of the child, having that in the file, things like that. But I do believe that there is lack of consistency on some of the other stuff, the more kind of evaluation assessment piece does have a lot of variety depending on the residential program that the child is in. And so I do think that's something we could work on, is perhaps this third party or, whomever it is that is going to be in charge of this, that they be the person that, or the entity that creates that consistency amongst all residential programs in terms of the assessment that is done when a child comes into that program and the kind of information that we are trying to get from that child and family when they come in, such as, have you ever run before? And if so, where have you gone? And, things like that. I think they're super important questions to ask. I don't know that every residential facility does sort of all of that. Does that make sense? And I don't know if that answers your question or not, Stephanie, because there's lots of nuances, but.
Great. It feels like, and maybe Dennis, if you can chime in, if you've got additional thoughts, are there things in reg, and I guess maybe that's the real question, and I'll let you all answer that. That I guess what I'm just saying is could point our team to the right direction, right? So that maybe we have a nod towards that in the report, which says, the task force is aware of regulations contained in blah, blah, blah. And what we're suggesting is different in the following ways, or enhances those rules or regs in a certain way.
Yes, and we have those rule sets open right now and are currently working with them with stakeholders. So now is a good time to really try to formalize what we think we would like to see.
Dennis, can you give me a site? I know I have all the childcare rules up somewhere, but do you have that top of mind at this?
It's the Secretary of State's website where all the
Correct.
rules are. So what the rules that we would be looking at mostly around this issue would be 7701,
yeah,
7705, 7714, and 7705.
I knew you'd be the one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, I think that, and I don't know, Dennis, if it should go into reg or not, or maybe it's just, you know, like you're saying, Stephanie, we say, you know, we understand that regs exist and they cover these things. And then, you know, in addition to that, because, you know, I think it'd be great, in my opinion, I don't know if everybody else agrees or if all residential facilities are going to agree to this, but it'd be great if we had a standardized sort of assessment that every residential program goes through when a child enters their program. So, and then, you know, things could, it would even be better than if a child goes from one residential program to another, that sort of document could follow the child. So we already enter the new residential program with some really good information about this child and family, you know, and then we could just add to that document. So that would even be better. But
so Norma, we agree with you. And we do want it in rule because we want, to Sergeant Cotter's point, we want everybody doing the same thing.
Yeah. And I think that's what we've been getting at too. I think knowing the reg sites that you referenced, Dennis, and what information is already included in state regulations regarding the information that providers are to collect on youth, I think is important in sort of thinking through what additional information might need to be collected on youth when they enter care, as well as you know, at different intervals of being in care, or if they've run away. And I think your point about you know, potentially implementing a specific assessment tool and also a requirement for all providers to use that tool, I think will help with the consistency piece. Brian?
Yeah, just to again reiterate, I know that this is a great testament to the work that the task force has already accomplished, but the four recommendations really do interlayer quite a lot. So just as a refresher for recommendation 1, it's contracting with that third-party organization to develop the pre-admission and recovery screening tools. And then the sort of the lever that we used was creating a 1-year pilot program that would implement that tool in a number of counties. And then at the end of that, there'd be an assessment and consideration of whether or not to scale that up. So again, hopefully those sorts of questions would be addressed and be able to hammer it out in that process. But yeah, when we create the final report, we'll be trying to, you know, weave together the recommendations in a sensible way, so it's more clear what the ask is going to be for that third-party entity. But I hope that we capture, I think that in some ways we've already captured a lot of the comments being made today, and just hold us to that when you're approving the final report, that we're able to weave those together in a comprehensive fashion.
Thank you, Brian. Dennis?
I don't think we need to wait until we have the contract underway, and then we have to wait for the final result of what this form is going to look like. We can still move ahead with rule requiring providers to use the state prescribed form, and put in some language around upon implementation or something like that. So I think we have some good flexibility to still just continue to move forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dennis. Do you have a timetable?
It's now we have all those rule sets open right now, and we're hoping to take them to state board in the next couple months.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Doris, I'm sorry. I can't figure out how to raise my hand and screen share at the same time.
Yeah, no problem, Jordan.
Sorry. I just want to follow up, Dennis, or anyone who can kind of help answer in regards to how information travels with a youth. Because Norma, I hear you, and Brian, I hear you. Like, part of the issue is getting this info. Would just love a little bit of education on that point. Is there anything outside of trails, or how does that information travel? So if we were to do this recommendation, would it have to include some mechanism that creates a new system? Because it sounds like it's really contingent on that continuation of the info from placement to placement and the ability to release it to outside stakeholders.
You know, in my opinion, sorry, I should have raised my hand.
No, you're good.
In my opinion, it'd be great if there was some mechanism where the information could be shared from one, could travel with the child per se. That doesn't exist now. So when a child comes into a residential facility, you've got to get the consent signed and all of that stuff. And then you can access the information by contacting, whatever facility the child may have been in before. And then, hoping that they're going to send you the information quickly, right? Everybody's super busy. So there's no way that I know of where the information travels with the child.
Thank you for that, Norma. A follow-up question to that. How well does Colorado do with respect to their the medical passport sort of following the child or youth in care? Does anyone in this group know?
We do reasonably well with that. It depends on the referral source, though, too. County departments of human services are better than the regional accountability entities, making sure that follows the youth. I don't even know if the regional accountability entities actually even have that.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm thinking that as we think through the information effectively traveling with the youth, I think sort of any lessons learned from the medical passport, kind of approaching Colorado and closing any gaps that exist in that might be a place to start in trying to ensure that information then travels with the youth as they go, between placements.
We can do some relatively simple things around that too. Like we can put a rule, a provider-facing rule, in saying that you cannot accept a referral of a child or youth that does not include this assessment, and that will require the placing entity to have it and have it ready for the provider before the youth is even placed.
Okay, thank you for that, Dennis. And I know we're going between altitudes, right? Like we're talking, kind of higher level, but we're also thinking about implementation. And I know it's not the role of the task force at this point to be thinking about implementation, but I think that it's helpful in thinking about, what additional information or nuance might need to be included either in the recommendations themselves or in the broader report for consideration. So I appreciate the discussion. What other thoughts, reflections, ideas, friendly amendments do task force members have? Elizabeth, I saw that you had your hand up and then it went down. I didn't know if that was... No, you're good? Okay.
Just playing with my screen.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I just to fill the silence, I guess. I like the recommendation. I want to thank the subcommittee that created it. I think that it's smart. I think it makes a lot of common sense, and it's nice to see, you know, when I look at the categories as examples. I mean, I think that there's a lot of material that a third party could work with to create an overall coherent system, right? To ensure we're treating all youth in the same manner and considering the same things, understanding we're still humans. And there's always still going to be a piece of decision making involved. But I don't know. I just want to thank the groups because I think it's good stuff.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. So I think we've largely heard from folks who I think agree with Stephanie's sentiment. Anyone have reservations about what's included in here? And if so, what your reservations are, so that we can account for them in the record, but then also identify where there might be opportunities to clarify the language to address any concerns that you have. Scanning my Hollywood squares to see if anybody's coming off mute to chime in. Last chance. All right. I think I'm passing the baton, Trace. We got through that quicker than anticipated.
That's great. All right, thanks, Doris. Jordan, if you want to stop screen sharing, we can just move right in then to our prevention group. I'm gonna do it a little different. I want to Jenna is gonna kind of give an overview first of just the conversation that was had. So we're talking all things hardware, y'all, and you read the recommendations. But we've got some work to do to get to really where this is most relevant as it relates to policy and just kind of some things to really wrestle through. So I want folks to understand where the conversation went with the group first. We'll look at the recommendations as they are, and then really diving into some of those specific recommendation pieces, and let's talk a little bit more specifically around what this group wants to see, and you know what potential barriers there might be, but also really just moving things ahead. So Jen, I'm going to hand it over to you. Appreciate the work you've done to be ready to share out for the group.
Sure. Did you want me to screen share, or should I just talk through it?
Just talk through it first, and then we'll bring up the specific language.
Okay, that sounds great. So also a thank you to Brian and Stephanie. I know that you guys went back through to help kind of condense it a little bit more. So I'll give this overview, and then of course, if there's any questions, let me know. Overall, working to identify methods, like Trace said, actual hardware to help deter children from running away when they are in out-of-home placement. Overall, the task force is recognizing that we need to do this in the most supportive and trauma-informed way, and also keeping in mind kind of the least restrictive level of care. So our overall recommendation was the use of the physical infrastructure, both inside and outside of facilities, to help prevent youth from even leaving. We looked at things that would include, but not limited to, delayed locks, secured perimeters, and pedestrian safety mechanisms such as crosswalks and traffic signals. We also want to recommend the use of advanced technology such as motion detectors and light sensors. And again, looking kind of at meeting the safety and security needs in the least restrictive way. With all of this, we really want to make sure that we're looking at assessing youth prior to their placement in facilities to make sure that the placement is appropriate that they're going to. And then recommending that this is reviewed on a pretty regular and consistent basis to determine if that higher level of care is still appropriate. if they need to step down, or vice versa, if they need to step into something that is more acute. And then we're also recommending that the presence of the physical infrastructure should not be seen as a substitute for adequate staffing. So always taking into account the number of staff on site and not limiting that just because there's extra hardware in place. So that was kind of the gist of it. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. And I wanted to just keep us full screen for the conversation, but I put in the specific language into the chat if it's helpful. And again, I also share the document with you all above that with the link. So curious for folks. Well, actually, first, real quick, anybody in that group have anything to add as far as context of the conversation and maybe potential things that we were wrestling with, et cetera, but just want to make sure that anybody else doesn't have anything to add before we open it up to the full group. All right. The one thing I'll add is that we looked at this from, I think it was Jenna that you originally had the perspective of, let's look at this at a variety of levels, right? Like at the room level, at the facility level, at the, like this specific room a kid might be in, at the specific facility, the grounds, and the perimeter. So that's kind of how those pieces came to be, that we kind of analyzed it at each level of like, all right, what feels appropriate at this level, what feels appropriate at this level. So that's the only thing I would add just for like process for you all to understand around how they got to kind of each of the pieces. So curious what, Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I know I'm having hand problems as well. I don't know where my guy went. Yeah, and yeah, thank you, Jenna. I think you more than aptly summarized everything. I think the only other thing I just wanted to highlight, and I want to tap Brandon's brain on this. It looks like he's having computer issues. Thanks, Becky. But I do want to tap him as we have this conversation, because we learned a lot about him and his facility and his use of technology, which I think really was important to our group, right? There was definitely concerns, right? We don't want to treat these youth as criminals or make them feel like these are jails. And when Brandon started introducing us to some of the techniques used in his facility, we were all pretty heartened by that. So I just want to extra highlight, double click on the use of technology as perhaps an innovative way for us to get to this goal, but also take care of our concerns about things that might appear unduly restrictive, I guess.
And I guess I'll just add to that, Stephanie, and make sure there's just to clarify if anybody has questions. So exactly like you said, like not looking like a prison with high walls or barbed wire or anything like that. But he had brought up like motion detectors, and so there's actual like lasers out there that kids probably can't see, but if they cross that threshold, then it's notifying staff. So it still feels and looks very open, but there is that level of protection for those kids.
So as it's currently written, what questions do folks have? What clarifying points do folks want to make? And then I have some questions too around how we're gonna operationalize this, how we're gonna actually to get more specific in our recommendation around what does this look like in policy? Is this every facility? Is this some facilities? Do we mandate it? Do we say this is a best practice? So we'll get into that. But as far as the actual content goes, what questions do folks have or additions? Go ahead, Dennis.
Not really a question, but just a comment. These things are already all allowed. Providers can already implement these things. There's nothing that prohibits the use of a time delay lock, laser things that, well, I mean, depending on the privacy in the bedrooms and that kind of thing, but all of these things are already allowed.
Yeah, and that's, I think, helpful for folks to hear, which I think will actually inform our second half of this discussion of, is it consistent in each of the facilities? And I think that's what Brandon talked about too, is that it's not. And so I think if you have facilities have the option of that, which is great, but if the challenge of kids are still running and it's not consistent across facilities, is that something this group would like to explore I think is more what so I appreciate you naming that, because I think it's helpful for us to know like what's the current state. The current state is these things are all allowable. So it sounds like this group isn't going to have to do any sort of recommendation of making these things allowable, and more the exploration is, so then at what level are we recommending that they're implemented versus just allowed?
I have some thoughts on that because I think
Yeah.
it's linked to the run assessment. I don't like it would probably be, it would hurt our placement continuum if we required all of our providers to do these things. Some of them just aren't going to be able to do it. But if we accurately get the run assessment down, then the high risk runners go to those facilities that are able to handle this, that have the infrastructure for this type of thing, so to speak.
So let me, and yeah, so I appreciate that, Dennis. Let me ask you the question of, are the facilities where those high risk runners, where they go to right now, are those identified as, is that just sort of like a no, is that like an insider's secret that we know that these places are better for the kids that have a higher risk assessment? Is that something that's actually dictated by, if a kid is assessed at this level, we know that they go to A, B, or C facility? Like what's the policy that actually like informs where those kids go versus someone's like judgment? I'm just trying to understand the difference between like again, someone saying, yeah, I think they should go here because of this. So like trying to dig down into at the policy level what currently exists.
Trace, that doesn't exist, and that's I think my point is we need to have that, rather than dictate all facilities have this infrastructure. If we have that in place and we're accurately identifying the youth that are at most risk, then we can ensure they go to the correct facility.
So would you well, all right, let's go to Kevin and Jenna, and then I have a question kind of Dennis around like if we have certain facilities, then maybe that's where maybe it's not a recommendation for mandate across all facilities, but it's a recommendation for mandate across, X amount of facilities. And those are somehow identified and linked to the assessment like you're suggesting. So Kevin, we'll start with you, and then we'll Jenna.
What Dennis just stated, I mean, that I can tell you that with my personal experience, that always happened informally. That was always discussed, that, we knew my son was a runner, and that was always discussed which facility would be best for him. So that's always happened informally. The quandary I'm in, and I maybe I just haven't put it all together in my head yet, is how does prevention interact with the law? In other words, we discussed the law, but how does prevention interact? What facilities feel comfortable doing, and when, and what level of emergency is a run? And that's what I'm not sure we've linked together. So I just wanted to state that that's how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, Kevin, can you say more? I just want to make sure I'm understanding like what sounds maybe more like a concern that we're not linking, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding what that is.
Yeah, I mean, if a kid is going to run or starts to run or whatever, what can a facility do? What's our recommendation going to be on that? What level of emergency is it whenever a kid tries to run? And to me, that feeds right into prevention. What kind of facility? I mean, locks and stuff are great. That's not a jail. They're not fail safe. And at the end of the day, I just think it feeds into what the law is or isn't. What a facility is going to feel comfortable doing or not doing.
Yeah, and okay, that's super helpful to hear.
So it's a quandary I'm in. I'm not giving you a conclusion here.
Well, I'm not, so I hear what you're saying, and I think that's certainly something we need to obviously continue to explore. I do see that as part of the continued prevention conversation as far as the broader policies in play. But I think today, so I hear you kind of like interlinking the two. I think today we need to get clear on the hardware piece, just because that's the specific kind of recommendation we're working on. And we need to make sure that we're weaving that into the continued conversations of this prevention subcommittee, which is going to continue, right? So if you look, so going back to that kind of roadmap piece, I'm actually looking at Brian to kind of think like that specific piece that we're bringing up as we think about the roadmap. Where do you see that interplaying? I'm not trying to say no, Dennis or Kevin. I'm just saying that right now for this specific conversation, I would put that on the shelf. So Brian, just want to put you on the spot if you looking at the roadmap where you see that.
Yeah, the next time we divide into our prevention and intervention subcommittees, the prevention subcommittee will be looking at physical restraint. So that's next at bat.
Well, and I hear the physical restraint piece, but Kevin, I'm also hearing that you're kind of like also wondering like what's the lever that's pulled when someone runs and what's considered an emergency and what's not and those sorts of things. So I think that is a continued part of those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, in my simple mind, if you don't answer question A, you really shouldn't go to question B. And that's where it starts is the law. What do you want? What's the result you want? And then so we're just building it a little differently than I expected. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Yeah, I think
to
that
think about. That's all.
Thank you. I think hopefully we're getting at some of that with recommendation 3, the question of what kind of emergency level responds gets built into the response protocols developed. So if a kid that we're very concerned about running runs, then that protocol will specify, okay, that's when we have the immediate time frame for response. That's when we go through these designated specified protocols to ensure that it's given the level of immediacy and like emergency that entails. So hopefully that at least gets to a piece of it. But again, if we have these conversations and we're still not addressing that concern, please let us know. Because yeah, that's a very, very important part. We really appreciate your voice.
Thanks, Kevin. Norma, I see your hand up, and then Dennis, I know your hand was up. I don't know if you still want to jump in, but go ahead, Norma.
Without anybody hearing me. So I think I just wanted to say that I think we just need to be careful, and because it's not that easy, in my opinion, at least, to just say, these are the 3 residential programs that have, the equipment or whatever that's needed for high risk kids. Because you don't want to put 10 high risk kids into one milieu, right? I mean, that's just going to create total chaos. so so it's more about, and what we also know is that, there are times when kids are just at human services, right? Because they had a 30-day notice and the 30-day notice is up, and now the provider is saying, well, we can't have them here anymore. And so then what happens is they just go to whatever placement will possibly be willing to take them. And so I'd be interested to hear from Brandon. And I know he's having computer issues, so we might not be able to hear from him, but I'm no longer in the residential business. So I'd be interested to hear from him because he is in that. um what are his thoughts about this? I think that the entity that's hired to sort of create all of this stuff, one of their main things should be thinking through that piece, right? Like making sure that there's something in place where we're not putting 10 kids who are at high risk for running in one facility, right? So, instead, how do we really assess what a child needs and then sort of work from there? The reality of a high risk kid who's truthfully at high risk to run, in my opinion, is they need a lot of individual care. And I don't mean just hiring a body to follow them around the milieu. I mean like real individualized care. So somebody who's going to be really talking with them about sort of how they're feeling, ranking the risk at that moment, what it is that's driving that for them, right? Like there's all kinds of things that have to happen. And sometimes the setting itself is what's triggering the child to want to run. And so there needs to be some intervention there then also. So I'm certainly getting into the clinical weeds, and I know we don't need to be doing that. I'm just saying I would be cautious about putting something in place that says there are these 5 facilities that can take high risk runners, and then we're funneling all of those kids to those facilities, because I think it will backfire on us.
Yeah, Norma, I appreciate that. I actually want to just make sure that we stick on that point for a minute, because I think that then if folks feel in alignment with that broadly, then we need to stop having the conversation about a specific group of facilities having, more and more. What are we doing across the board to ensure that at each facility there is a baseline, X as it relates to hardware, right? So I'm just trying to keep us in the container of like all of these things I think are so important and they're all interplaying with one another. And we need to leave today with very clear ideas around what this group wants to say about hardware specifically across facilities. And do you want to see that, to Norma's point, at each facility? Because I'm seeing a lot of head nods around, yeah, I don't want 3 facilities tagged as like the high risk facility, because also, I remember in our group that did come up and someone said, well, what does that say to the kid if we say, oh, well, you're going to X facility? Right. And they're like, I'm going there because they know that that's a high runner facility. So I do want to bring that point in because I remember someone making that point in our group. So Jenna, I know you're obviously steeped in this with us. So jump in, and then I want to just make sure that I'm kind of taking a pulse check on Norma's points with folks. And you can throw that in the chat too, like Becky did. Thanks, Becky. If you're kind of in agreement that it's not really about a couple, but it's more about a standard policy across the board. Go ahead, Jenna.
Yeah, and I might be alone in this, but I'll put it out there. I think that is already happening. We have, especially with FFPSA and things closing, we have a lot of high-risk kids that are all living in specific milieux together. I don't see that going away anytime soon. And so I think we have to work with what our system is currently at. And they're at capacity with really high-risk kids all being together. I think we have to look at, again, this is where we're recommending this trauma-informed, least restrictive environment. And so we have to keep assessing these kids. And when we can step them down, to lower levels of care, we need to do that. But I think we have to look at our system, and our system is showing us that we have really, really tough kids and they need places. And so we have to look at those levels and say, we are going to need a lot of prevention to keep these kids here. I think kids aren't stupid. We can't hide the fact that they're going to a really high level of care, but we can make it as trauma informed as possible, and having them work their program and to step down. So I think, to me, I think it's really important to look at what our system currently is, because I don't see that going away. And then as they step down, we still have, pieces in place to prevent lower level of running, but that can still happen. But I don't know. I just want to say, I think that we're already at that point. We have a lot of tough kids that are all living together, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And maybe I'm way off base with that.
Well, no, I don't think you're way off base based on the conversations that have been had. I think what I was just trying to get at, let me step us back a little bit, which is that's not what I was hearing from Norma, I guess, is that I think that's already like what I'm hearing is like, yes, that's already true to a certain level. And with this increased policies, we shouldn't double down on the idea that there's only these facilities that handle runners and that there's this, this hardware and then the rest of them don't have this. So that's kind of more Norma. I don't know. Looks like you're on a walking treadmill. I was like, what's Norma doing, bopping her head back and forth?
Okay,
Norma's getting her steps in over there. But Norma, I don't want to speak for you. That's kind of how I read your comments, is like, let's not like make that a thing.
Right. You're totally right. And I am on a treadmill because I just cannot sit still for long. I just can't. So in order to be on screen, I gotta like figure out something to do.
Love it. I love it.
So I apologize, but yes, you're absolutely right, Trace. I mean, I think by virtue, we know that there are difficult kids in all residential facilities, right? I mean, that's why they're in residential. So, but yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, Trace, is let's not just pigeonhole these 3 facilities that are just going to have, only high risk runners, not necessarily high risk kids, but high risk runners, because I think that could create a problem.
Yeah, but Jenna, I think we're all we're saying it in different ways. So I think, yeah, I'm hearing you there. Dennis, jump in, and then I've got a suggestion of how we're gonna keep this conversation moving. Go ahead, Dennis.
I just want to point out the complexity of if this committee wants to move in that direction, that there's a lot of complexity to this. You're going to have local zoning issues, and also the current rate structure doesn't support these things. So like I'll use Southern Peaks and Third Way Lowry as an example, just specifically Southern Peaks right now. We pay $1,550 a day per kid that we place there. That's how high needs they are. We cannot afford to pay $1,550 a day for every youth in QRTP or up placement, right? So we would have to have some kind of way to make a distinction between what high risk means, and I understand what Norma's saying, but we are not going to be able to afford 100 beds at $1,550 a day, right? That would be a huge financial ask.
Dennis, I appreciate that. I'm gonna push us a little bit in how we set this group up around the being bold piece and the not getting too hung up on the, again, not being like too pie in the sky on implementation, but also knowing that these are recommendations that then they would have to, to your point about local zoning, for instance, that would be something that if a bill were to be drafted, that they would do some of that work. But I don't want that to hinder our ability to make a recommendation that this group feels that that's what's needed. Again, with the and I'm not trying to, I'm just thinking of what folks said that they wanted to do, and so I want to hold y'all to that and to the be bold piece, and make sure that we're not getting ourselves too stuck on the what ifs.
I think it's stuck on the what ifs either, but I want to put a fourth a recommendation that at least has the possibility of being implemented. So I want to have a realistic recommendation, right? And I get your idea of being bold, but if we put forth a really bold recommendation that has very little chance of passing, I think we miss an opportunity.
And sorry, I'm not trying to get into a back and forth here with you, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So in this idea, let's say that this group says, I'm just going to pick on the first one I see, delayed locks, that every facility has a delayed lock feature because it has been shown by the facilities that currently do it, that we heard from folks in our group that delayed locks, they're not a perfect solution, but they help, right? And if they help, that's good enough as a recommendation. Are you saying that that is, are you saying that that is too bold of a thing that's not implementable or
Depends
not?
on where you say the lock is going to be. Is it going to be on all the exit doors? Because I don't know that the fire department's going to allow that. Is it going to be on a perimeter fence? Not all of our facilities have a perimeter fence, and those can be very expensive. So I just don't know exactly the specifics of what that group is talking about.
I think the specifics of the group is that needs to, I mean, obviously local decisions will have to be made around where the lock is, because you couldn't make a recommendation that every lock is at X, right? But that locks need to be implemented as it relates to the whatever exit doors are available at that facility. So I'm just sharing with what the group was saying, which is I don't think that the recommendation was so in the weeds that they would say that every facility has to have it exactly in this way, but that delayed locks as a mechanism is something that, and this is something that Brandon, I'll say you jump in on, is that, you said, hey, delayed locks are great. And, we have specific doors, for instance, that we can do, and we worked with our local fire code, et cetera. I don't know, Brandon, is your computer working? I want you to jump in as the example of like how that decision was made at a facility level. It might not be there. But Dennis, I appreciate your point. I think the recommendation, as the way that the group was wrestling with it, was more recognizing that there are going to be decisions that have to be made at the facility level, but that if it's just an option, that people will opt out. And that was the challenge. So Norma, jump in, and then Stephanie, I want to bring you in too, because I know you're in the group.
So sorry, I want to echo what you're saying, Trace. I think we really need to try to push ourselves to just try to come up with something first and then figure out, okay, how much do we think this might cost? Is it doable? Is it not? Because I think there are a lot of things that we think aren't doable, but they really are if we put our brains together and really figure out how, what are the avenues we can get things done through. There are grants, there's all kinds of stuff. I think Ashley, wrote in the chat that, wouldn't it maybe it's a one-time thing, right? Like, so, we give every facility X amount of money to do X things, and then that's it. It doesn't have to affect their ongoing rate. So I don't know.
Thanks, Norma. And Ashley, I appreciate you calling out the chat thing because that's helpful. I'm kind of like chatting and not looking at the chat. So I would love for you to come off in a little bit. But Stephanie, jump in, and then Ashley, want to bring that to the conversation too.
Yeah, thanks, Trace. I was just going to highlight what Ashley wrote. And I agree, Dennis, without a doubt, right? To put out a recommendation that, is sort of pie in the sky, won't go anywhere. I don't think these are either or conversations. Period. I think that, and Ashley, I really appreciate your input as someone who has such extensive experience with the state legislature and funding. I've seen funding occur for initial evaluations for many things, and especially for infrastructure, I've seen a lot of money going into projects like that. And I also appreciate that at some level there needs to be some ongoing money because things wear out, right? Et cetera. But I do think there's creative ways to do it. And I think that I guess there's a 2-point question because I still see in the chat some comments about, hardware should be least intrusive, right? Which I get. And I don't know if this group has agreed on just generally this recommendation that there should be hardware and it should at least look like this. That's a second inquiry, or the first inquiry. The second inquiry is, what is the mechanism to impact the hardware recommendation? These are two different questions. So I guess it would be helpful for me first to go, is in general, is the group okay with the fact that there would be hardware as has been described, which is very unobtrusive, right? Especially when we look at Brandon's model. The second inquiry then is, how does this group write a recommendation that is operationalized by another party? And that's the piece we're just mixing those issues. It would help me to separate those out.
Yep. No, exactly. Let's Sergeant Cotter and then Dennis, and then we're going to be at 9:30, I think, in just a bit. Take a few minute, we'll take a break because we're at the halfway point, and then we can come back with that framing, Stephanie, since we've hashed out some of these initial questions and thoughts. Go ahead, Sergeant Cotter.
So I just want to say that, when we talk about topics like this, the money comes if this is what the legislature wants to do. And the example I'll bring is body-worn cameras. The state literally said, put a camera on every cop in the state, and it happened. And it's hard for me to envision a situation where we're looking at these kids that are in these high-risk situations where they brought a whole team together and said, we want you to only recommend things that don't cost money. I don't think that's the case. I think in this case, if we looked at these facility upgrades, we probably need to build in time so that facilities can start to do their capital campaigns, whether that be for state funding or grants or federal grants, however they want to search for it. But the money will eventually come if we can demonstrate the need.
Appreciate that, Sergeant Cotter. I know it's a complex thing, but I think that's a helpful framing as far as the body cameras go, that if it's a group that's come together and said this is necessary. So thanks for that. Dennis, go ahead.
Since we're on the Timothy Montoya Task Force, I think we should pause here and honor Timothy, because Timothy was in a facility that was surrounded by a perimeter fence that did have a time delay lock. He still was able to get out of that facility. I'm not opposed to time delay locks, but Timothy got out.
That was exactly what I was thinking, Dennis. Thank you for saying it.
I appreciate you saying that too, Dennis. Somebody in our small group when we were doing this said, what's the goal? It might have been David, I don't remember. The goal is not to prevent 100% of runaways, not because you can't do it unless you just legitimately lock down every child in every place. The goal is to reduce it, mitigate it, have these less severe consequences. And so I appreciate that this particular recommendation we're talking about is not the be all end all, but it's obviously one piece of a bigger puzzle. And I think some of the other pieces we're talking about in recommendations 1, 2, and 3, because I think this one's 4, may have more of an impact. To Dennis's point, this is not new stuff. You can do this stuff, but I do think there are facilities that would like to do this if there was some support or money or help available to do it. And so we could increase the amount of facilities that have some of these measures, but in a vacuum, it's not going to fix the problem. It has to go along with the other recommendations. So I think it's good to remember that, because sometimes as we talk about each recommendation, we start to silo them in our brains, and that's not how it's going to work, hopefully. And maybe that's a point we need to make in this report, that you can't pick and choose one or two recommendations because you're not going to get to the end goal, that you kind of have to look at it as a package. And that might be a really important point for us to make.
Thanks, Ashley. I think that's a great reminder and actually a great spot to pause for a minute. But I do like Dennis, I really appreciate you, of course, always centering Timothy in this. And Timmy. So thanks, Elizabeth, for jumping in. Thanks, Dennis, for that. And I think, when I think about the full name of this task force too, the Timothy Montoya Task Force to reduce youth, right, who run from out-of-home placements. It's Ashley, you're exactly right, right? Is there a silver bullet? No, right? Are there opportunities to really hone in on that word reduce? And I think that's what you all are honing in on here well. So with that, let's take a 10-minute break because I think this is turning into a really robust discussion and I really appreciate it. And I want to make sure that we come back with a framing kind of based on how some of these questions have gone that kind of keep us moving forward. So it's 9:26. I'm gonna actually say, since we made it through the first one so quickly, I'm gonna say to 9:40, give us a little bit of time. So take a bathroom break, check around, get on the treadmill with Norma, whatever you need to do. But let's get back at 9:40 and be ready to roll from there. So thanks y'all for that discussion, and we'll be back soon. Meteor, if you've never used. Oh, and thank you. Appreciate that, whoever clicked record. So we just took the poll for Mentimeter, which we can make part of the minutes, Jordan, with the yes. And Renee just joined back, so that might have been where the issue was with the numbers. All right, so now I want to get us into this question then is, if we agree that that this is a part of what should be happening as a continuum of care, right, to Ashley's point, that this is something that is a piece of the pie. I want to throw out a couple of we're sitting here kind of thinking through this on the break of like, what does this group want to ask for? What do you all want to see actually happen? Now I'll give you an example. A silly example, Dennis, that you're gonna love is we mandate that every facility commit $1 million to making this happen, right? We're not going to do that, but that could be an example. Another example might be that we want to write, you want to put into law that every facility, have some sort of mandatory safety evaluation with these as options, that we set a budget aside, that we ask for a one-time specialized grant to bring everyone up to speed at a baseline level of XYZ across facilities as it relates to these sorts of mechanisms. So I'm going to stop there. I don't want to lead too much. I'm just throwing out some ideas of what do you all want to see? What do you want to see happen?
Trace, meaning what do we want to see happen? Meaning like out of those examples that you gave us, like not just those examples, but like that kind of stuff is what you're looking for.
That kind of stuff, right? At what level of implementation are we talking about? Becky, I'm going to pick on you because you're.
And then can we pick on Ashley too?
Then I'm going to pick on Ashley. I see Ashley.
Depend on her legislative legal mind on these matters.
Please, yeah, Becky, go ahead, and then Ashley.
Sure. We were vibing, Trace, because I was going to come off mute anyway. I would suggest that we would want to see some sort of a survey or what's a better word for it? Like a I don't know, just a survey of all the facilities that we have in the state to see what they already have, because I strongly suspect that we have some facilities that have locked doors or the fences or the various things we're talking about, but they don't have kids in care right now because they can't afford staffing because we have a giant workforce issue. And so I think my point is, I think a lot of the facilities have some of these things that we're talking about, and it would be interesting to know who has what, so that we could know sort of what we're working with. Like Tennyson has all of the things we're talking about. Do they have a QRTP or a PRTF? Neither. So yeah, I think it would just be interesting as we look at, who's out there facility wise, what do we have? And then what would it take to staff up all those facilities, so that we could have a broader continuum like Norma was talking about.
Becky, I appreciate you bringing us to the beginning, which is like, I'm going to call it like a landscape analysis, right? Like what is currently true to then be able to do, this presumably next action. So one, getting a clear understanding of like what facilities have what, and are they at least at a baseline potentially? And I'm using the word baseline because I heard that in our group quite a bit around if this group comes up with a baseline. So Ashley, jump in. What would you add?
I think that's a great idea. As I put in the chat, I think if I were to, I have an assumption that may be faulty, that there are some facilities that would love to, let's say, put in a fence, but it's cost prohibitive. And so I think the assessment that Becky is talking about, like an individualized assessment of what the needs are, would help inform it. But you could, in statute, create, like I said, a grant fund where a facility could apply for funding for one-time costs to like build a fence, for example. So you would fund it through the General Assembly. That way there'd be some money there. It wouldn't be on the facilities to do it. Like you wouldn't be, and the facilities could choose to opt in. Like if they want this, that's great. If they can't do it or they don't want it or they already have it, there's no requirement there. So that would be, I guess, a light touch way to do it that would have maybe a little bit less of a fiscal impact than what Trace threw out as, I know, not a real option, but like every facility has to dedicate $1 million. Like that's not going to go anywhere. So I think that would be a good option. We're just talking about the hardware piece, right, Trace? We're not talking about the whole thing.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Yep, exactly. All right, so statute would create a grant fund for a one-time cost upgrade to facilities. So we do and it could be interesting, Ashley. I'm just thinking of this to build on the landscape analysis piece that Becky said. You then identify that these 10 facilities have the least, intervention or the least prevention currently. And so you invite your kind of higher need facilities for a first round of applying for these potential funds or something like that, right? Like that could be another way to think about that. Or you open it up. I'm just thinking of like,
and you have guardrails on the fund about what it's used for and what the purposes are, right?
Right. Exactly. Before Dennis, I come to you, unless your comment is in response to Ashley, I wanted to open it up to see what folks think about that as a specific idea of a way of both funding this, but also again recognizing the like local needs, the specific needs of different facilities. What do folks think about this idea? Seeing some thumbs up. Any major concerns with that idea?
I would add, Trace, that it would be good to ask the facilities what they would want. If they could wave a wand, what could they use to be helpful? I think we might learn a lot from that.
I could see that as a function, potentially as a landscape analysis, both one, analyzing what's out there, and two, what do you want? What do you need? What do you need and what do you want? Sort of thing. Dennis, are you going to take us on a different direction? I just want to make sure. Or are you adding into this conversation?
Just going off of what Ashley said, I appreciate what Ashley said. It needs to be a soft touch because it doesn't matter how much money you throw at some of our facilities. There is no possibility of putting in a fence. So I'm thinking of Third Way York, Third Way Lincoln, that you don't even have that option. And we cannot put in requirements that are going to take away part of our placement continuum. So I don't know that we have all the right people at the table making these recommendations. You have to know what the placement continuum looks like, and we have to be very, very, very careful about putting in a floor that could cause damage to the placement continuum. So this discussion is giving me a lot of anxiety if we're going to put in requirements that every facility is going to have to do.
Yeah, and I'm hearing so I'm hearing that from the first part of the discussion, but it's sounding like, so it sounds like you like Ashley's idea though, as a light touch of a way to bring up the baseline without sort of putting people in a corner, a potentially an impossible corner. I mean, my teenager lived at the York Street Third Way campus, so I know exactly what you're talking about, Dennis. So totally tracking on that. But do you like, so it sounds like you like Ashley's idea as one idea, one solution.
Yep, I'm on board with that.
Okay. Norma, jump in, and then Stephanie.
I was just going to say, I agree with Dennis around this piece. Like, we don't want to change what the program is trying to accomplish. And, third way, like offense would really change their programming and what they're trying to accomplish with kids. So I think it's a matter of just sort of understanding, right? Like the facility, what kinds of kids are they really good at? What kinds of kids do they take? And then, and then sort of working from there. And so maybe there are some, I don't know, some kind of guidelines or requirements or something for facilities that if you are, taking these kinds of kids or whatever, then this comes into play. And if you're not, or if you can, substantiate why this would change your entire milieu or your programming or the mission of your agency, then, you don't put a fence up or, you don't do X, Y, or Z.
Yep. Yep. So leaving that kind of option up is what I'm hearing. Stephanie, jump in.
Yeah, just brainstorming, at risk of pushing everything to a third party evaluator. I mean, this almost feels like the job of the other recommendations, which is that, you would pay somebody to conduct this assessment of facilities, right? Which would include, going to communities and facilities and talking to them, listening about their needs, concerns, writing this up in a report for the General Assembly, right? I mean, you could almost make that your first recommendation. And then upon return of that report in 1 year, um, recommendations shall be made about how best to ensure that facilities can, comply with various security issues in the least intrusive way possible. I mean, I'm just thinking we're talking about another evaluation. And one might say, to other people's points, that fences aren't that thing, right? And I also think a smart person would be like, we don't even need fences anymore, right? Like there's other things we can do, including the other components of what this group have discussed, right? So maybe this is a smaller component than we even think, right? I think that's a real possibility here. And so maybe it's about scaling these recommendations, right? At some level, like, we emphasize heavily the prevention piece, the risk assessment tool, right? The response piece, and, light touch. This is a piece that supplements it. But I think assessment by a third party with a report due to the legislature about, what are those safety concerns? What are those places where run risk could be minimized? Might be a good way to just do this because we don't know. There's so much we just don't know.
Well, I wonder, so Stephanie, with that, so, and I put down, survey assessment, landscape analysis piece. I wonder if so to your point about not kicking the can down the road, I'm also thinking around the urgency piece, right? Around facilities that know they need help now, and there's some low hanging fruit for them around, particularly because this task force has done some of the work, the research work around like what is out there. I'm thinking of like the Mission Impossible lasers that Brandon brought up. It's like, whoa, cool, right? And Brandon's like, yeah, those are like $150.
Yeah.
If part of the outcome of this task force concurrently to the stuff that you're recommending, because I think you're right, where it's like we don't know what those needs are, and we know that there are current needs, and so this grant program could still be running concurrently, almost as like a pilot to bring folks up to speed because we know it's a need now, and there's a need for this deeper analysis to understand like what the broader needs are out there, so that the legislature could actually make more recommendations that actually get at the entire system as a whole. I'm just throwing something out of like, does that meet the need of like the immediacy that people, I'm hearing the urgency from folks in the now, and maybe that's this group using the research that Brian has done and that conversations we've had where we say, listen, we've researched these 10 things as mechanisms to reduce running away. And there's this grant program. If you don't currently have those, right, and you would like to get up to this kind of more baseline, in addition to, we are doing this broader landscape analysis to see what the needs are across the system that might require more of an intervention. Is that?
Yeah, I'm going to defer that big question to Brandon and Norma, because I just think it's always hard without knowing what the needs are, right, to set up any sort of funding mechanism. So I hesitate on that, but I also really appreciate something you said, Trace, and that is the immediacy of now, right? And I also appreciate the complexity of these issues and the need to hire third-party people and evaluators and be thoughtful about the process, to be thoughtful about the financing. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at a minimum of another 3 to 5 years down the road at some level, right, for these things to happen. And maybe folks here would say, great, better late than never. But I guess I don't want to lose sight and of kids who are in need now, and that does worry me. I don't know. I have no answer. Sorry.
No, and I think that we're kind of breaking these out a little bit. So Norma, jump in, but I'm curious to we could talk maybe about keep the immediacy piece front and center and keep this larger systems conversation also. So I think we can do both.
Yeah, so this may sound super naive, but Stephanie, do you really think it would take a year to get this information? Like, I don't know where the funding would come to hire a third party, right? But I'm sort of I don't know. And I'm a super impatient person, so that may be the issue here for me. But I'm just wondering, if we hired somebody, there are a number of facilities, but there aren't that many that we couldn't, go and interview and ask some, have a list of questions that we're asking them, right? And then compile that into a report, because I sort of feel like that information is going to be key for this task force in terms of the recommendations that we then move forward. To have that information, I think, would be invaluable for us as a task force. And I would think that, I could be wrong, but if we hired somebody and that's what they were doing, I would hope that 3 months would be enough for them to get it done and get it back to this task force if that's what their job was.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Norma. And Becky, I'd love to have you come off and talk about that. I would much prefer that if we could do this informally, and maybe we as a task force can do that informally, that would be great. I was just thinking, if we wanted to do it formally, if you will, with a budget request, this task force doesn't even put its recommendations out till the end of this year of 24, which means 25 would be a year to push through any sort of legislation, which means then you're near 20, mid 25 before you actually pass legislation and or get funding to do any of the evaluator funding work. So that's why I was saying that is a year at the end of the day.
It makes sense. I just think there is a more immediate need, and I'm, wondering, could we figure out a way to get that need met and do something quicker?
And maybe we could do something now that serves as the foundation for something in 25, right? That's more specific. But I'll let others talk. But I do like, Becky, I want to hear from you.
Sure, I can just say quickly, I survey Kafka a couple times a year on various issues, like, something about a bill or something like that. And we usually get a great response. And I know that not all facilities are members of Kafka, but the vast majority of them are. And Dennis could help me figure out, it would only be a handful that aren't already members of Kafka. And we also have access to Fostering Colorado. So, the private providers are already in our world. So we could do something fairly quickly, I feel like.
I think if this committee creates the survey, we can blast the survey out quickly.
Brandon, what do you think? Both general thoughts, but also this idea of that sort of being the next step as far as the what are the needs now, and what could this committee do, or what could this committee do?
I mean, I agree with everything everybody's saying. I think every facility is unique and what they're looking for. I do think if you ask the question like to facilities, do they need investment and money for security upgrades to however that looks to help secure the there's at-risk situations, both externally and internally, they would all say yes. And I think similar to those of you guys that have been involved with the facility school system, what CD did over the last couple of years to help inject money into an underfunded situation with CDE and their facility schools. They they gave money, for specific things that you had to report to, CDE and get approved that you're going to utilize it for these, scenarios. So if you're looking at, like to me, like going into detail and surveying people, I do think it will take time and it will be, not help the immediacy of like a lot of organizations. But if you put it in a situation where here's money for, that we're going to allocate for security for organizations, and then they have to outline a plan for each of those, what's unique to them, whether it's cameras, whether it's, the Mission Impossible lasers, whether it's fencing, like they can, then work with, the state or wherever that is to help inject it. Because I don't think anybody's going to tell you that anywhere that they can't use upgrades around how to secure their facility in whatever level of care they are, operating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense, and really appreciate you jumping in with that. I'm wondering if we're not overthinking this, but like if there's just, I think based on this conversation, it feels like there's a pretty clear a couple of things. So Brandon's like, listen, you don't have to. It's not a question. It's a definite. It's what I'm kind of hearing, and you're representing. You're one of our voices in addition to Becky representing facilities. So I think just listening to that is super helpful. So one, I'm hearing like you feel confident that there is a need, right? And so I'm wondering and Stephanie, I'm also hearing you're kind of pushing. So I don't know. Someone push on me if I'm oversimplifying this. That a recommendation around the hardware thing could be now currently a one-time funding opportunity for folks to upgrade and or implement, right? And in addition to that, there's this grant program, and this group is also releasing kind of a list of best practices based on the research that has been done and the conversations that have been had around what's out there for implementation, both from like a low cost all the way up to high cost, right? And recognizing that each facility is different. And so I'm just thinking of those two things. Am I oversimplifying something there? Does anyone not like that idea? Does that feel like, Stephanie, to your kind of concern around the funding mechanism without knowing the what? But again, I think the what is just this container of increased security opportunities for folks. And here's the menu of, best practices as denoted by this task force. I don't know. Dennis, jump in.
Are you saying like once the survey is done and we have information, like so if we're able to like do this like through Kafka and folks like that, like Becky is saying, right, and we are able to get this information in like the next 2 months at the latest, then sort of doing that? Or are you saying doing that in addition to, like, do you know what I mean? Like once
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, it sounds like Brandon's like, listen, the survey's not necessary, but a survey might be necessary to like further justify additional recommendations. So I guess what I'm saying is like on the version 1, Brandon's like, yeah, like easy peasy. Everybody needs money to increase their security in a trauma informed way and least restrictive, et cetera. So that's one thing. 2, we're also running this survey to get additional data needed. And if there are additional recommendations to come from that, because something is very clear, we could also do that. So I'm seeing it kind of as like a twofer, if you will. And then Becky, that doesn't mean that we're stalled because if something with the survey doesn't come to fruition, that we have no recommendation around hardware. So I feel like the low-hanging fruit that I'm hearing is there is a need, the immediacy piece, people need access to funding, they need to make their own decisions, kind of the local control piece of like per facility. Here's a list of like recommendations, again, Mission Impossible lasers, etc. Here are the costs, etc. that people are pulling from. They have to apply for those funds, and based on the information we gather from Becky, there might be additional recommendations to come back to down the road. Does that answer your question of what I'm kind of throwing out there? Stephanie, jump in, and then Dennis, you jump in as well.
Yeah, I just really appreciate everybody's thinking on it. Yeah, Brandon, I like what you're saying, right? The question isn't, sort of what or if. So yeah, I mean, if Becky, you were able to do a survey that would measure those needs, if you will, at least, as much as we could, that certainly I think could help refine this recommendation. And that's what I think the purpose of that survey would be. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. That would be a good thing for this group to measure for the legislature who will read the report to get a little more specificity about the actual need. So I think that is a positive thing.
Dennis, did you want to jump in? I saw your hand up and sorry, I didn't mean to.
Norma asked what I was going to ask.
Okay. Does that all make sense then? Are we all kind of, again, I think it sounds like the recommendation then is to move forward with this idea of, again, for around the immediacy piece. And then we're going to also do this survey, and that will help inform either refining of that recommendation or potentially additional if something crazy were to come out of that survey, Becky, that we're like, we have to address that, right? Does that sound right to folks? Okay. What else on this topic? I want to make sure I'm not, I like where we got with that. It feels creative. And it feels like, Dennis, to your earlier points of concern, it feels like a kind of a middle ground of addressing it, also recognizing the funding challenge, and also recognizing the immediacy need. But as it relates to the hardware conversation, and I'm gonna kind of, what are next steps to help? Yeah, what are next steps to help Becky? Is it to draft? Do we need to talk about what questions we're asking? Actually, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking about, thanks Norma for your offer to help. And I was thinking about asking Brandon too, since Brandon does have all the cool stuff, I think maybe more than other providers at this point. But yeah, just kind of what questions to ask. And I envision it as a survey and then also either follow-up calls or maybe devote a Kafka meeting to the conversation so we can get some, feedback. Yeah, I'm happy to start drafting. I'll draft something. And I also need to get with Dennis and Lori and figure out who the people are who are not in Kafka and how do we get to them. But yeah, I think this is something we can do in a month.
Agreed. And Becky, I'm happy to make some calls to some facilities if we want to like divvy up the facilities so that we can actually talk with them. I think we should all be asking sort of the same questions, right? But then there'll be probably some diversity in the follow-up questions that we have based on what their answers are. So I'm happy to do that. The only caution I would have about doing it in a Kafka meeting is just that then again, we're not getting each individual residential program to tell us their specific needs. We're sort of just getting a bunch of stuff. And I think it'd be really good to try to pick some of their brains a little bit and have them be as creative as we're trying to be here. Sure. So that's just my 2 cents, but obviously do whatever you think is best.
I was thinking both and. I was thinking survey or individual interviews and then also group discussion, only because the group discussion, sometimes we get inspired by what each other says. So I would love to have your help, Norma. Thank you for offering.
Yeah, and Becky, I can offer some time to that too. Just
okay. Sure. And I think your point is great about having consistent questions, and I think a lot of open-ended questions, to figure out what we don't know.
Can I add one thing? to Trace?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, like, where I think the security hardware of whatever people's choosing really helps in this specific to runaways, because I do think there's some, when you talk about fence, it can stop, like, it can stop a runway, but that's not, feasible for every facility or every organization. But like when you're talking about like cameras and different security hardware, you're really talking about supervision and increasing the ability to provide, quality upfront supervision in a lot of cases around security. Like I said, in both internal and external, scenarios. And when you do that, that deters a lot of those type of, behaviors. It also makes, people feel safe, and that will reduce these things. So the supervision is where, the hardware in my mind can really help, deal with the complexities of the type of kids we are dealing with.
Appreciate that, Brandon. Go ahead, Stephanie, jump in.
No, I was just going to offer, Becky, let us know how we can help, because you're going to end up with a lot of notes. And so just let us know how our team can fit in and support that effort.
Thank you. That would be great.
Yeah, it's a lot of data from experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that could even include at some level if you need us to sit in, only because like the translation from the notes to the written report can be so tricky. So if I could just insert us even and helping to draft or at least listen to the questions, that would be super helpful too.
Okay, thank you, Jordan.
Becky, you're going to need to Foster in Colorado to help too, because we need to get data from group homes.
Yeah, I will. And we work with them all the time, so I will definitely do that. So that's Dennis and Lori, if we can set a separate time to figure out how to get the N of who all these people are. Great, thank you.
All right, I love it. I want to one other thing to pivot us a little bit on this same hardware conversation, but I want to make sure we're not losing sight of is, and Dennis and maybe Brandon and I'm not sure who, but for the like ongoing assessment, and I don't want to use the word accountability, but kind of ongoing assessment of like best practices being implemented in the needs of facilities in an ongoing way as it relates to like these particular measures. Is that something that already exists? Is that something that this group should explore as far as like, again, a recommendation around, every 3 years, facilities receive an analysis around, the hardware needs as it relates to the reduction of youth who run. I just wanted to see if there is a current policy in place around, I'm going to use accountability for lack of a better word, around the accountability piece of that in an ongoing way that y'all are aware of.
I don't want to speak for her, but I think we might want to set aside some time for maybe a presentation possibly around this, because Lori Burney has a team that has the authority to do this, and she could implement it possibly. And I don't want to tell her what to do, but like around, so her team approves trauma-informed plans for our facilities, right? The use of that hardware should be done in a trauma-informed way. So there could be a quality assurance component that it's called the performance management outcomes team. They could possibly build that kind of thing in.
Appreciate that. Lori, did you want to jump in on that at all? Of anything that either currently exists or ideas around that kind of mechanism?
Yes, I think I'm happy to bring, maybe it would be helpful, just like Dennis said, to bring the team to do a presentation. Maybe we start there.
Around what currently exists?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, what currently exists that is still in the beginning phases. I mean, we've been working on it for a year, but these are things that we can actually, I agree with Dennis, that we could add.
Great. I'm curious. That was something that from the group around, again, like what does this look like in an ongoing way to not just the accountability, but also to partner with facilities and what are your needs and ensuring that if it's given a million competing priorities, right? So ensuring that this piece is something that is brought up to center often in an ongoing way. Is this something that, go ahead, Stephanie, jump in.
Yeah, this is just for Lori. Lori, can you just explain a little bit more about what your unit does? I think that would just help me understand how we would target a presentation. That'd be great.
Absolutely. So just like was just being identified, right? We, as everyone probably knows, right? Dennis and I, we serve as the regulatory authority, right, with licensing and monitoring. But for years, we felt like there was this missing component because licensing and monitoring hover around, right? And their responsibility is to ensure that our providers meet the minimum standards set forth by the Colorado Department of Human Services, also known as Volume 7. So the PMO team is a very separate unit outside of licensing and monitoring that is really focused on the quality of care and really partnering, just as it was identified, with the providers. We're not here to, provide violations, anything like that. It's simply to, number one, ensure that trauma-informed care plans that are submitted and approved by the department are actually implemented within the services being provided. And we do this through, we have assessment tools with rubrics, et cetera, that have been designed to gather data and so forth, and really just partner with the facilities to create goals for improving their services. The other goal, the other part of this team is really to focus around and center their approach around having our providers specialize in what it is that they do and meeting, the needs of certain populations that are being referred. And then the third and really exciting part is that their goal is also to provide training. So our licensing and monitoring, they provide technical assistance around violations and so forth. But we're actually in the process of creating a staff academy that our facilities will be able, their staff will be able to participate. Anybody that provides direct care, from direct care staff, supervisors, and clinical therapists, to come in and, we will provide a 40-hour training for our providers that centers around trauma-informed care, all the way to, specific needs to address runaways, certain populations, et cetera. Does that make sense, Stephanie?
Yeah, it does, Lori, and thank you. I just wanted, for the benefit of the group, for you to define that. So thank you very much. Let me ask you, because I just am trying to be cognizant, right, of future agendas and planning. And by the way, I still have you all for another 40 minutes. So Lori, talk to me a bit about how would the work that your group does, or how could the work that your group does inform the discussions that we're having today, very more concretely?
They're actually, that is, trauma-informed care is, and we can, it's very complicated, but right, it is the way in which that having trauma-informed care implemented into facilities, there's statistics and research to show, right, that kids are less likely to run away. They're less likely to attempt to avoid behavior therapy or mental health therapy and so forth, being in a trauma-informed environment. So the goal, that's why that trauma-informed is really to help, make choices, having the staff make choices prior to anything taking place. So if a child is on the milieu and they're pacing back and forth, right, then intervening right away prior to that youth running from this facility. So they know that this child is, feeling anxiety, he's demonstrating this, et cetera. And so it's a means of really addressing that with the youth prior to them leaving. And then also helping put in plans in place prior to a youth even coming into the facility. So if we know a youth has runaway behavior, there actually should be a plan that is developed prior to that youth entering into the facility, right? So that we can address like what works for them, what helps calm them down, what are some of those precedents that we can take to help prevent that child from running from the facility. So it's really dealing with it, Stephanie, I guess, to from a clinical standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does, Lori. And what I hear you saying is that obviously the goal to increase or to have a trauma-informed environment necessarily incorporates these other elements that we're talking about, right?
Absolutely, right.
Yeah, particularly as it at least today's discussion as it relates to sort of hardware, and hardware, I use that word very broadly. Because it has a scary sound when you use the word hard in any word. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I guess I'm just, since we have you, what are things that you've seen in your experience, either locally or nationally, that would be least intrusive and trauma informed manner or ways in which facilities can prevent youth from running in the hardware space, if you will?
So, I think it's really important to note that, right, like our children have rights. And, I know that's part of what this discussion is all about, right? And restricting their rights when it comes to hardware and that type of thing, blocking egress, restraining, secluding, all of those types of things. There's so many laws that, as you know, that center around those topics and so forth. And it's really to protect their rights, because what we're really talking about here is youth that are, experiencing mental health and behavioral health issues, right? Have not necessarily committed crimes per se, but really are experiencing and struggling to just maintain in the community. And so the goal is for our QRTPs and our PRTFs and all of our acronyms for our licensed facilities is to provide that treatment so that they can, go back into the community and be successful in school, in a home environment, and be able to live the life as being a child, right? When you're talking hardware and so forth, we do already have in rule and regulation that you can have, right, delayed locks. I would say most of our facilities, so we do have those, but not all of them, right? But I think the bigger thing, is that we really also need to focus on is the clinical perspective, because these are treatment facilities. And how do we, again, acknowledge his behaviors way prior and, to them happening, and have a plan in place that the treatment team agrees on, to include the placing authority, and everybody that agrees on, like, this is how we will intervene if this child starts to act in this way, right? Really focusing on the individual needs of the youth. That's what our rules do too. So I think with that, I think these discussions are very, I've actually enjoyed listening to them, to, know the different perspectives, and I understand the community, right? From the police to the neighbors, and everybody involved in this call, right, has different experiences and so forth. And I think that these conversations are robust, and it helps the department figure out, like, how it is that we can actually, how do we wrap services around the providers that then in turn wrap services around those youth that we serve.
Yeah, Lori, thank you. I appreciate you chiming in here at the last minute. It's good to have you. Yes, and I think a lot of what you speak to, this group has certainly captured and memorialized in their initial recommendations a lot of the items that you're discussing, right? Or philosophy maybe is a better way to put it. It also sounds just from your response that, you know, as it relates to some of the mechanisms this group has discussed, and I'll just use delayed locks as one of those things, that these things are already being used. So at the end of the day, it feels like we're already permitted to do various things to secure facilities more. And it's really a matter of consistency is what I keep hearing, I think, from the group.
I agree with you, Stephanie, 100% and stuff. It's about consistency and really implementing those trauma-informed care plans, right? And being proactive rather than reactive in the situation.
Right. Thank you, Lori.
Brandon, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to kind of follow a comment on what Lori's saying. I 1,000% agree with Lori. I believe that the treatment and the clinical aspect is, I guess, the gold mine to this industry. The issue, the point I just want to make on it, though, you know, when we're talking about the science behind your mental health, it's, you know, I consider it a way behind, you know, it's way behind a lot of other sciences, and it requires human infrastructure that and a development of the human infrastructure that it's just not currently anywhere in society right now. I think we're headed hopefully in the right direction in a lot of ways, but you know, a lot of these things to ultimately stop, you know, these type of behaviors and how people manage this through clinical means. You know, I think my fear is it's going to take years, decades, to get to a point where the level of at-risk kids that are in our communities are properly managed through, you know, that type of practice. And so, you know, when I'm looking at, you know, infrastructure from a hardware standpoint, you know, I think those are short-term solutions. And I hope, you know, down the road, as, you know, like I take for Southern Peaks, you know, we get better every year. You know, and I need less of those things because the human infrastructure within my team is developed and is a further along and their experiences further along. And you know, and I think we should be approaching that. And I think that should be, we should all be investing in that as much as possible. But I don't know if that's the short-term answer, you know, in years here of, you know, protecting the kids right now, preventing them from what's happening, whether it's through human trafficking or the dangers that they're having out in the community when they do run. And that's my only fear about ignoring the realities of where we are as an industry right this second.
Yeah, and Brandon, so I'm hearing you kind of doubling down on the kind of dual path here of like immediacy versus long-term hopes and, you know, hopes and dreams. For you have a facility that has staff that has continued professional development and deepening their relationships and their understanding of their work and whatnot. And there's a need today and tomorrow and the next day for kids that and places and staff that aren't quite there yet. So I'm kind of hearing the tension between the two. Is that accurate? Yeah. All right. Well, I think we have some solid. I'm just kind of Jordan and Brian. I'm going to pick on you two as from a policy perspective. If you feel like we're not, again, based on, you know, I'm looking back at how the directives are written and also just the goals of this group and knowing the kind of hearts and minds and hopes that folks have shared of taking bold approaches to supporting these kids and supporting these these facilities and these places, do you feel like we're not drilling down enough on any particular piece of that as it relates to the hardware piece? I just want to make sure I'm not stopping short based on where we kind of got.
No, I think that our plan moving forward is Brian and I will certainly coordinate with Becky and Norma so that we can help be of assistance and jump in on the surveys. And we'll want to make sure that we have a robust public facing report out of that survey. So it can both go in the report and we can look at it that way, because that will have to go to the legislature. I think what we're going to do is pause until we get those results before we finalize drafting recommendation 4, because it sounds like that will serve as the foundation. We'll see where we want to head after that. So we likely will be revisiting this recommendation once that is done. I don't think there's anything today that prohibits us from moving forward based on the roadmap you showed earlier, Trace. I think that we're just going to take an extra step. We'll apply it to the hardware discussion and the ultimate recommendation we do. And there is, I just want to float, Trace and I were kind of conversing, we may have to consider maybe an additional meeting here and there to get through these subjects as we bring these back on. In fact, I'm just going to say we're at least going to have one more meeting to bring these survey results back because we're so tight on getting through the other subjects. So our team will get together and we'll look at another date to bring back that survey result and revisit hardware. But I feel like it's best at this point, we just want to pause that drafting until we can get those results in.
The only thing I would add to that is there have been a couple of mentions of like referring to best practices for hardware usage, which I'm not aware of like a document that captures that or what entity gives voice to that. So I just don't want people to assume that we have that ready to go. But that's just something that Jordan and I will be thinking about while we're drafting these recommendations.
And then I think I just have one request, Trace, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Dennis, thank you again for the citations and volume 7. I'll definitely refresh myself and move through those. Is there anywhere where the unit Lori just discussed has their materials available? Can I look at those assessment tools? Is that created in regulation anywhere? Is there anywhere with all that information condensed so that we can really take a strong look and have a better understanding ongoing on what that looks like?
I'll have Lori get in touch with you.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's all we need, Trace. I think we're in a good spot.
Okay. All right, great. So we have this survey, and Brian, I'm just thinking based on kind of the changes we're making, I think the survey is still relevant, I mean, certainly for 3. But I also know that obviously we have some more work to do on recommendation 4 based on how this conversation went today. But I think it's still important to get folks' feedback there as the recommendation is currently written. But Brian, just want to make sure that you still see that. Yeah, I don't know if you changed the survey on the back end to reflect some of those changes. We're still asking folks to respond to the 4th recommendation as it's written.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. All right, great. So here's what I'm going to move us to. So we have this survey. Typically we send the survey like an exit survey and say, all right, see ya. We're actually going to stay on the call today, though, because we want to make sure we've got time for it. So if you could humor me and pull it up now, want to be able to, again, this is for our purposes of being able to refine and make sure that we understand where folks are at with each of the recommendations. Obviously, keeping in mind for recommendation 4, some of the continued work that's not captured quite yet there. This is the way it was written, up until today. So just sticking with that language as it's currently written, and knowing that there's more to come on the hardware piece. I'm going to drop in the survey link, and it shouldn't take you too long, but appreciate your attention and time on that. And I'm going to say, let's give it till 10:45. Then I want to make sure we just offer for the record public comment, and then we'll close out from there. So I'm going to give us till 10:45. Feel free to go off video. We'll come back, ask for public comment, and then we'll close out today's meeting. Thanks, everyone. Gonna give it just about one more minute. Looks like our folks on camera, y'all finished up? No, not yet. Okay, give it a couple minutes. Brian, actually, I don't think I can see the back end. If you want to like just keep tabs of how many responses we have of when we might be ready to move on.
We're currently at 8, and I'll send you the link that should get you access to that.
All right, looks like we have a good majority of folks. That survey will remain open, so if you're still finishing it beyond the meeting right now, that's totally fine. But if you wouldn't mind finishing that up today, would be amazing. Super appreciative, and thanks for folks for responses there. I do not see any members of the public on, but I just want to ask if there is any public comment. Okay. All right, well, y'all, this was a great discussion. Really appreciate our ability to kind of push and pull on one another and make sure we're sharpening our thinking, and just really appreciate the grace we're all giving each other as we work through some really complex topics. So I think, like Jordan said, we're definitely gonna have to add a meeting at some point to kind of be able to circle back to this. Becky and Norma and Brandon and others, really appreciate y'all taking the lead on doing some of this additional research that the task force is requesting. I think that's going to give us some really good data around this to be able to shape up recommendation 4 in a meaningful way. So thank you for that. And we will all, of course, support you how we can. And then with that, Stephanie, I'm going to hand it to you for closing comments, and then we'll get out of here.
Great. I just want to thank everybody. Really interesting and deep conversation, and I'm always smarter because of all of you. So thank you. Look forward to continuing the good work, and we appreciate you being here.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. So our next meeting is April 10th. We'll be back in our subcommittees of temporary placement for intervention and restraints for prevention, and then we'll be in touch soon about any additional dates as we shape up when we think this survey can conclude and have something meaningful to talk about then. So thank you all. We're letting you go a little early. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.